Hey everybody, so this is a masterpiece of decorative art, a transforming desk made for the 1834 World's Fair, the precursor to the World's Fair, by a master furniture maker who is somewhat obscure, but nevertheless who is featured in the Paris Museum of Decorative Arts, the northwest wing of the Louvre. And we can glance at the Charles X room here with a daybed in the background on a platform with deep blue fabric made, like this desk, by Jean-Christophe FISCHER. Now, Jean-Christophe FISCHER worked notably for the last king of France, fulfilling commissions for the Château de Neuilly, and most of these pieces likely burned in the 1848 Revolution fire at that chateau. And furthermore, Jean-Christophe FISCHER operated a small workshop with his son, and so their output was limited, but it was very, very memorable. And if we look at the key text on 19th century decorative arts, Connaissance des Arts, le 19e siècle français, it's curious that although his name is really not in the collective consciousness of the decorative arts, he is featured in this sort of introductory paragraph in the furniture section of the book as someone who should be remembered alongside the greats. And in fact, if we look at the jury reports of these precursors to the World's Fairs, the Exposition des Produits de l'Industrie Française, we will notice that Fischer and his son, his firm, was awarded many medals alongside the greater names of the day, like Bélanger or the Jacob family. So what's particularly special about this desk, other than the fact that it's sort of the most coveted and interesting type of decorative art, you know, a transforming piece like this is far from a boring stool or a little nightstand. But other than that, what's really exceptional is that we can read in a text written by one of the jurors of the 1834 exhibition, we can read, as we operate the desk, how it operated when it first debuted. Sort of, you know, runs a chill down your spine here, but this is not what I'm looking for. I translated this in this little brochure. Okay, so Mr. Fischer, an able as well as modest maker, wanted to show that with the forms our era has created, one could remain pure, even severe, and obtain the most elegant look. In Mr. Fischer's desk, the top cover is flat and horizontal. When one wants to write, one pulls a lower shelf parallel to this cover, which is retracted inside the desk by the same movement that pulls the writing surface out. And then, when one pushes the lower writing shelf back, the top cover returns simultaneously to cover it. According to Stéphane Flachat, almost 200 years ago, this mechanism is as convenient as it is artful. And apparently, according to him, it allows for this piece to have a shape that is much more graceful than that of a typical cylindrical desk, another single-sided secretary-type desk where you know, this isn't like a bureau plat, this isn't a minister's desk over which you receive guests. It's sort of a single-sided piece that you work from over there. But anyway, dare I say that this mechanism also allows the piece to appear like a piano, evoking, you know, the lyricality, the beauty of whatever you are going to do with the desk. Like me, saunter around it, talk about it all the time. And anyway, moving right along, we can see that we very easily extend these extra writing surfaces so that more people can work with you, your secretaries can work with you. And it's like, how is the sun coming over here, yet there's light hitting it from over here? I mean, we are just surrounded by light in here. Normally this piece is very much covered, I'll tell you that much. What we also see here, guys, is an absolutely stunning culmination of French neoclassicism here at the end of the traditional timeline in the decorative arts. Normally by the 1830s, that's when we sort of consider that the art paradigm of furniture is really transforming, devolving into more of a commercial industrial paradigm. But it's important to know that although most of the furniture of the 1830s, 40s, and 50s is very much industrially produced in a series furniture that has nothing to do with the true decorative arts, that doesn't mean that the last of the master furniture makers, the last of the grand names, weren't still operating. When we do find a masterpiece from the 1830s, we're dealing with something that's logically the culmination of decades, of centuries of master furniture making traditions and techniques. And so we end up with something that is of a period that's misunderstood and underappreciated, but we end up with something that's very much awesome. And so Jean-Christophe FISCHER actually won a gold medal for bronzes at the 1844 Paris exhibition. And that's, a testament to the unique and interesting bronzes that we see on this desk that really don't remind us of bronzes that we're going to see elsewhere. Whether it is the Ionic capitals here, often you'd just see Doric or Corinthian ones, but the Ionic capitals here are somewhat rare. And then we see that the tops of these typically Louis-Philippe legs with these parapluie-shaped, umbrella-shaped legs, we see that they are capped with the frieze of eggs and darts, featuring both matte and high-gloss tones of gilding. This little frieze that runs along here in gilded bronze is typical of the 1830s. And then we see these wonderfully sculpted, perfectly chiseled handles evoking water plants, these neoclassical handles that deploy the architect's table. Well, all right, everybody, so in the interim between the first part of the video and now, I've obviously changed clothes, things have happened. A major Midwestern museum acquired this piece, so we really only have like 3 more days to finish this video. But after our little preamble about Jean-Christophe FISCHER, let's just go ahead and take a look at some of the parts of the piece. Firstly, this wonderful traverse here, which we see up upon closer inspection is actually sagging down to the floor. Now, a piece like this is from an obscure period. It was never associated enough with the market to have been faked, but this is something we often see on 18th century French bureau plat, just flat, non-mechanical desks, where we see this unfortunate but somewhat reassuring sag in the traverse. And we see it here slightly, between the writing shelf and the drawers, that this board is drooping down, showing the effects of gravity over the last almost 200 years. So anyway, with that little tidbit covered, let's open the drawers so that we can see this hyper-precise dovetail work here, typical of this first third of the 19th century. And then we're going to notice another, let's just say, boring drawer, a large drawer, which is a little hard to open because of the sag. But anyway, it opens if we push up. And we're going to notice that the drawers are made out of solid mahogany, which is common for a piece like this, which was a showpiece, which was the centerpiece of this man's exhibit at that precursor to the World's Fair. But on most pieces, we would notice that the drawers would be made out of oak or a less noble wood than, say, mahogany. Now, this is the least boring drawer of all, which is the one that presents Jean-Christophe FISCHER's stamp right here next to the lock. It says Fischer à Paris, Fischer at Paris, in Paris. And this is an unusual spot to see a stamp on a piece of furniture. Normally these stamps, which were originally mandated by tax law, would be found on more hidden sort of functional construction parts of the piece. They wouldn't be presented for you here, but in my thinking, Fischer added his stamp on the top of the drawer with a little bit of pride, because now this obliges the user of the piece to occasionally run across his signature. We also see that the locks are signed KOLB, which is a firm that apparently made locks for pieces around the 1830s. I've seen other pieces that are documented as having been from the 1834 Paris exhibition that have locks KOLB as well, although I have not done any of the research and I cannot quickly figure out exactly what that firm was or where it was located. But anyway, it's something that we see reassuringly on other pieces from this exhibition. This is a dusty rosewood lockbox. The color of the rosewood is a little bit darker than the exterior of the piece because it's been preserved from all sunlight all of these years. And it opens. And then we see a few little pieces of one of the legs here, which I have kept because I intend to pass them along to the museum so that it can glue them back on. But if we come back over here to the legs, these typically, let's say, Louis-Philippe period legs, they're called des pieds parapluies in French, or umbrella-shaped legs, because they're sort of shaped like an umbrella, not to blow your mind. But King Louis-Philippe was famous for running around Paris with his umbrella. He was known as the roi bourgeois, the city king, the everyman's king, really, and he would walk around Paris on his own with his umbrella. And so this is really just a tapered and fluted, large neoclassical leg, but it's typical of the Louis-Philippe period, and now you know why they call it an umbrella leg. And these ones end in little bronze hooves, and when the desk is lifted off the ground by, let's say, a pallet jack that's padded, you can access a screw which actually fixes the entire leg to the case piece, to the desk itself. And the reason why those little pieces we looked at a second ago were broken off is that this leg actually comes apart into 6 different pieces. And when I first acquired this desk, the legs just were not screwed together very well, so the desk was able to sway around, and the one little bit of damage that's occurred is that this bronze frieze of eggs and darts was able to push that little rim up, and that's unfortunately the only blemish we have on a piece that has otherwise been pretty much conserved in mint condition. But why don't we move inside the desk? We may have already mentioned the story of the 1834 jury report that describes this wonderful mechanism perfectly. But again, when we retract the writing shelf, simultaneously the cover recedes back into the desk. And inside I have some black and white images here, which are the pieces by Fischer that are conserved in the Paris Museum of Decorative Arts. This daybed here is the one that I would like to steal, and it is currently on display in the Charles X room with a bunch of furniture for the Duchesse de Berry, other furniture in light maple from the 1820s. And then these 2 pieces are in the museum's reserve. But nevertheless, that's just a little bit of reference material here as a testament to the significance of Fischer's work, even if it's somewhat obscure in art history. And inside the piece, these 2 drawers, just like the ones on the exterior of the piece, they are in solid mahogany as well. And there doesn't appear to be any secret compartments here. I've taken them out. We can probably look in there. But anyway, there's sort of an underwhelming cavity that's just for the drawer. No matter how much you fish around back there, nothing seems to pop out. There's no secret hidden jewel or anything of that nature. But anyway, we see that the lock here is signed KOLB. The original key appears to have been retained. And the locking mechanism is very unique in that it is circular. And so that's something I've never seen before. And if we think about it, an unusual lock like this, maybe this was some brief lock style that, probably didn't work very well, but it's also in line with how the entire piece here is exceptional and unusual, so often there'd be a real depth to that exceptional and unusual nature, such that they would not just put normal locks on a piece like this, but they would make an effort to make sure that everything on a wonderful piece like this was sort of surprising and interesting. So anyway, if we close these drawers and creak this back closed, we can then take a look at the architect's desk here. Now, the bronzes here hint at something. We see that there's 2 pieces of wood here, 2 panels that are folded up. We see this curious little knob. But see, consoles are an architectural motif from ancient classicism, and they support weight. So seeing a console like this, as beautiful as it is, with this wonderful lotus flower that deploys from the scroll, typical motif, seeing a console horizontal doesn't make too much sense to me. But we see, upon lifting up these 2 handles here, we see that they quickly spring forward when we lift up this table à la Tronchin, which is an architect's table named after a Mr. Tronchin who designed the first one in the 18th century. We are well after the time of Mr. Tronchin here in the 1830s. But anyway, that springs forward, and we pull this little rosace out, which works a mechanism there that releases the latch and allows us to unfold it. And then we see these beautiful, stark rosewood surfaces here, highlighted by these thin fillets of hollywood, and then typical of, a piece that features such vast portions of tropical rosewood veneers, we see that there are a few cracks up here. We see some reassuring undulations in line with the age of the piece, with the fact that there's probably an oak frame, a layer of glue, and then obviously the veneer. And so over time, as those different materials react to temperature and humidity differently, well, we see that there are different undulations that appear. And so none of that's really a problem. Again, we just can't judge a piece like this with the same sort of perspective that we would judge new items today. There are a few cracks that have appeared, sort of unavoidable when you're dealing with pieces of veneer that are this vast, but they've been pretty expertly patched, probably the last time that this piece was French polished. And everyone mentions how new and how beautiful the piece looks, but this piece has not been over-restored. It's simply been French polished. And, you know, the reason why it hasn't been repaired or truly restored much, if we get to looking at it closely, is that a piece like this was considered something wonderful and very valuable ever since it was made. So generally speaking, one sort of automatically takes care of something like this. It's just a question of whether or not it has been properly varnished and therefore sealed from the elements. Every 30, 40, 50 years or so, this piece would not be in such wonderful condition if this sort of maintenance, restoration, revarnishing had not been performed. I believe the last time it was done was about 30 years ago, but the varnish appears to be in order. And anyway, we see a little bit of the varnish seems to have congealed here where it might not have dried and they closed the table a little too early, but that might buff out. Anyway, I always explain this to people because our modern eye tends to gravitate immediately to small imperfections. It's a survival mechanism, but we really can't apply that to our evaluation of French decorative art from hundreds of years ago, but it does help us contend with survival at the state of nature. And so let's go ahead and close this, at which point we're going to see that this table will fall back down onto two metal springs in the back, which are going to catch it and which make a very satisfying sound, in my opinion. We're going to see that this will slowly go down, contact those, and rest back where it was. And now, I may have mentioned that Jean-Christophe FISCHER won the medal for bronzes in 1844, for bronzes alone. And that shows us perhaps why these bronzes are so unique and why they are sort of outstanding in the repertoire of typical luxury bronzes we see on furniture like this, because they were probably designed and executed by Jean-Christophe FISCHER himself when most master furniture makers of his level were buying bronzes from the major bronze firms of the day, such as Thomire. And so that might lend us a bit of insight into why these bronzes strike us as somewhat unusual. It's because they were probably designed and executed by this one relatively obscure maker who only worked with his son and a small workshop, and therefore he didn't leave us much of his production to examine today. So one thing we might take a look at to finish here are these little rosaces, these bronze handles here. And one of the things that struck me as interesting and also very dangerous, because this is the worst thing in the world. I've put a lot of mileage on these silk gloves, but this is one of the worst things in the world that could happen, is that this little rosace will actually unscrew. And I think, it's an interesting bronze design here, but let's just take a moment to consider how horrible it would be if, let's say, that was missing. And with all of that said, everybody, as usual, I really hope you've enjoyed taking a closer look at one of the most interesting pieces that I have ever come across, a piece which is really the capstone of the traditional timeline of the decorative arts here in the mid-1830s. And I do hope, as usual, that the videos will help you, if you're new to the subject, really understand the difference between these typically pre-industrial decorative arts and everything else out there that we sort of loosely call antiques. So please subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed this content and if you'd like to support the endeavor of creating an online period furniture library of the most compelling pieces that I encounter. Thank you.